Welcome to the evening with the Louisiana Poet Laureate Alison Pelegrin. Whoop, whoop, whoop. This is the last event of the Words of Music Festival 2023. We're finishing out strong in one of our favorite spaces ever, Community Book Center. We'd love to, before we get rolling, thank Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities. That convenes the panel that selects the Poet Laureate every 2 years. And this year, the Poet Laureate program is funded by the State of Louisiana, so thank you to the State of Louisiana as well. Thank you to Mama Vera and Mama Jen with Community Book Center for hosting us tonight. We're so appreciative of the work you do year-round to uplift authors and writers in our city. And speaking of uplifting folks, as you all know, if you're holding a ticket for tonight, you're automatically entered to win a Community Book Center gift card. We got 2 because we're feeling generous. Vicki Leslie, are you in the house? No? Or Lisa O'Neill? If Vicki or Lisa walk in, they'll have prizes waiting for them. And that's all I have to say. I'm going to introduce these 2 beautiful people here. I will say right now, though, that I know for a fact that one of their bios is now obsolete because you have another line to add to it.
I do.
You do. So, Skye Jackson is an award-winning writer and editor from New Orleans, Louisiana, whose poetry has appeared in the Southern Review, Rattle, Green Mountain Review, and was hand-selected by Billy Collins for inclusion in the Library of Congress Poetry 180 project. In 2023, she was a finalist for the Iowa Review of Poetry Award. She's currently a professor at Xavier University. She's going to be here in conversation with Alison Pelegrin. Alison is the current Poet Laureate, but y'all are going to hear from the future Poet Laureate. I'm going to speak that into the ether right now, y'all. It's going to happen, and you heard it here first. Alison Pelegrin, Louisiana Poet Laureate 2023 to 2025. Is the author of Our Lady of Bewilderment, as well as Waterlines, Hurricane Party, and Big Muddy River of Stars, winner of the 2006 Akron Poetry Prize. She's the recipient of a Literature Fellowship from the National Endowment of the Arts and Atlas Grant from the Louisiana Board of Regents. She's writer-in-resident at the Southeastern Louisiana University, and her work has appeared in Bennington Review, the Southern Review, Ninth Letter, and as printable broadsides at Broadsided. To find out more about Alison and upcoming events, visit AlisonPelegrin.com. Welcome, Skye and Alison. Take it away.
All of you, thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is wonderful. I just want to dive in. I'm so many different things to talk to you about.
I'm ready.
Okay, so first and foremost, congratulations on becoming Louisiana's latest Poet Laureate. That is just such an amazing thing. I have to ask, how did it feel when you found out that you won the position?
I didn't recognize the phone number on my cell phone, so I was kind of rude at first. So, I mean, it wasn't anything I couldn't redeem myself from, but I was a little rude because I didn't recognize the voice. And then, as it started to kind of dawn on me what was happening, my husband works from home, and I went into his office. And I was just doing all these gestures, like trying, and he had no idea what I was talking about. So I just felt a state of disbelief. I mean, it felt unreal, I guess. And then it just kind of started to hit me how much of an honor it felt.
That's so incredible, and it's just so well deserved. And I'm just so excited about your tenure. So let's take it back a little bit. How old were you when you first started writing poetry, and what kind of triggered your foray into the genre?
My first poem I wrote on the school bus, and it was on a piece of paper. It said "Shut up," which I folded up and dropped in the lap of these boys that were bothering me. And so now looking back, I mean, at the time I just thought it was a message, but now looking back, I'm like, oh, those were fragments, definitely. But I really didn't write poetry seriously until I got to college. And I knew I wanted to. I used to write in notebooks and tell stories, but it wasn't anything that I had a gift for. And so I guess it wasn't until I really discovered poetry in college that I started writing poetry.
Was there a certain writer that sort of triggered that? Because sometimes we get activated by different other poets and other poems, and I'm just curious about that.
Well, I feel like everybody has that moment when they kind of realize that poets are alive, like, and living and on the earth, and it's not just these people in books that wrote Ozymandias or whatever. And so that moment for me, it's actually 2 Louisiana poets that I come to think of it. The first one was Yusef Komunyakaa, and I just found his work, like we had to find a journal that had a poem in it that we liked and bring it to class. And it was the poem Facing It that I found, which is like probably his most famous poem, or definitely his most famous poem. So he is a Louisiana writer, or was anyway, coming from Bogalusa. And then my teacher gave me a book by Cheryl St. Germain, who's another Louisiana writer. And the title of the book is Making Bread at Midnight. It must have been her first poetry collection. And I loved her voice so much. And she was talking about the stuff that I saw every day, and I didn't realize that could be in a poem. So those 2 poets at the beginning were really, really important to me.
Wow, phenomenal. That's so wonderful. Okay. So how has becoming Poet Laureate really changed your relationship to your own writing? Or would you say that relationship has remained the same?
It has not remained the same. At present, the relationship is that it corners out all of the time that I have, that I would normally be writing because I'm doing other things. So I don't have a lot of time for writing. But over the summer, I didn't teach over the summer for the first time, which was great. I was just like, I'll do without the money, and it was amazing. And so I was able to write over the summer. And after I got that call, like, I just felt, what I was writing wasn't changed anymore, but to have recognition sometimes of what you're doing, or that it is making some difference for somebody, felt really, it made me, or I guess it was a reminder that my work could be important, that poetry is important to people. And so I was kind of sitting down with that feeling, which was great.
It's amazing. Okay, speaking of that, this is a good segue to my next question.
Okay.
How do you think that a poet or poetry can bring a community together?
I feel like I'll always be learning the answer to that question. But one thing, I think that voice is the most important thing in poetry. I was at an event last night where it was a tribute poetry reading to Tina Turner, and the voices of the poets that were reading, it was just, it was so incredible. And I think that when young people especially, or members of the community, go to a poetry writing workshop or something like that, they want to be heard. They just want their voices to be heard and to share that. And any type of poetry event like that makes it possible for people to kind of be vulnerable and support each other and listen. And so I forgot what your question was, but I was aiming for it with my answer.
No, I think it perfectly
Okay.
It's just about how poets have an impact on the community, or how poetry can have an impact on the community. It's something that I'm always thinking about, as I progress as a writer, and just as a literary citizen, what can we do?
Poetry happens first, don't you think? The crises in the world, or things that cause alarm or terror and sadness and outrage. In my body, at least, the first reaction to that is poetry. Like, it might be a sort of short phrase that comes out, or I remember a poem, or something like that. And another reason I love poetry is that it's so portable. I always have a book in my purse all the time, but it also can live in my brain. I can carry it around. I can't carry my favorite novel in my brain, but my favorite lines of poetry I can just kind of have with me, like a mantra or something, which I love.
It's important to be able to call on the phone when you need it,
And I think because it's small, or it can be short, that I think it feels accessible to people. I've seen, going to my cousin's house, walking around, people write on the sidewalks little messages of encouragement to young girls or whatever, and I just think that's great. And it lives for as long as it lives, and then the rain comes and it's gone. And I love that. I love that job of poetry.
Yeah, whoever needs to see it,
Sees it. It kind of happens like that.
Yeah, and that's the same thing thing with our poetry, you know, we'll never know the impact that our poetry has on other people, right?
Yeah.
Or who gets to see it, or how it gets to affect someone else. So always trying to sort of think about that and lean into that.
Yeah.
My next question for you, thinking about that, what do you feel is the state of poetry in 2023 as we prepare to close out the year? I can't believe it's November.
I know. What is time? I don't even know what time
It's
is.
not real. That's all.
So, I mean, I can't be pessimistic about the state of poetry. I just can't, because I think so many different kinds of people reach for poetry. You know, I also think that sometimes people try to maybe govern almost, like this is the good stuff, this is the serious stuff, and this is what we value. But I don't think that's a good way to look at poetry. If people are kind of dipping their toes in that river, I think it's awesome. And social media and all these different, you know, poetry slams cropping up in different poetry groups, it makes it accessible and easy for people to create poetry, to get exposed to poetry. So I think the state of poetry is great. I mean, university presses, maybe not so great. You know, publishing industry, maybe not so great. But poetry, I think, is fine. So I'm not afraid for
I've been
poetry.
thinking about that a lot, you know. The systems need to evolve as we
Yeah.
are evolving. You know, there's so many presses that are shutting down, and it's just, it's like, how do we pick that up and take it forward?
Well, I'm always sure to list the press broadsided in my bio, because I love the work that they do. They pair poets and artists together, and they kind of do a collaborative piece, which they then make available as a PDF for download. And they call them vectorizers. You're supposed to print them out, and you can kind of put them everywhere. And I think that's such a great way to get exposed to poetry. And I mean, I guess you need a color printer or access to a color printer, but it's a lot cheaper than a book or going through that process. So anyway, I'm all about the little, and so I think there are lots of different ways we could think about getting poetry out there.
Yes, indeed, yes, indeed. Okay, well, on that note, would you like to read us one of your poems?
Sure. I'm trying to think of what direction I should start with. I'll start with something new, because I've been reading a lot, and I feel like I'm always reading the same poems. So I'll start with a poem that I wrote right around over the summer, as I was like, oh my gosh, I'm the Poet Laureate. And I'm a gullible person. It's just part of my composition. And I'm still being made fun of in my family, because my uncles told me, you know, they had a mounted deer on the wall, which was causing me great alarm, because I didn't want to see this animal up there. And I was confused about where the rest of the animal was. And so they told me, well, it's on the other side of the wall. And so Allison, you know, like goes around and is looking for the animal. And so anyway, I'm still getting teased about that. I guess I have a little chip on my shoulder, maybe. This is called, And in This Way the World Passed Me By. I am the one who flipped through all these books, dog-earing pages, so it's appropriate to refer to me as old soul, or at the very least ageless and wise, even though I obeyed the uncles who sent me hunting for the tail end of a mounted buck they said was on the other side of the wall. In yellowed snapshots, I stand out in the family lineup for my halter tops, and the look on my face, which is that of one who hears the ocean churn without a seashell in sight. Places I have never been are where I think I was born, full grown, but with something to learn each time floodwaters wipe clean the slate. I was looking with horror. I didn't know what I had written on the back of this page. It's just scripts. Okay.
Wow. I love this poem, and I love that your uncles are always reoccurring in your poetry. I found out when I was reading your book.
Okay.
And in different ways, like outshining you or making fun of you or something, you know.
Yeah,
and
that's
bringing
true.
them into these poems is just so wonderful. I love that. Let me see what else I have here. So, pivoting a little bit. So many of your poems are hyper-focused on aspects of nature in Louisiana, of the natural world. What would you say is a natural spot in Louisiana that brings you solace or inspiration?
Oh, well, for right now, I live in Covington, and we got paddle boards over the summer, and we've been going to the Bogaflaya River to go paddleboarding, which I'm enjoying less since I started seeing alligators everywhere.
They're everywhere.
They literally, like everywhere. If you go like that, it's an alligator.
Yes.
But I love that river. I love going around a corner, maybe where there's no houses, and I can see the sun kind of spangled in the trees. So right now, for me, it's that Bogaflaya River, which I find to be really beautiful.
So lovely.
Oh, I came over the causeway today as the sun was setting, which is the best time to head to the South Shore when the sun is setting. And you know, the pelican, I mean, it was like a cliche that a movie director would try to set up, with the pelicans flitting and the sun and the purple sky, and you know, it was really beautiful. Yeah.
Totally arresting. Those
Yeah.
little moments of the day that can kind of just remind us like everything is okay.
Yeah, and the pelicans. I love the pelicans.
So beautiful. So, to that note, we're talking about nature. So in Louisiana, we often find ourselves on the front lines of the climate crisis, right? Erosion of our coastlines and different issues that are really just plaguing us all as, you know, as people who live in Louisiana. Do you see a role that poetry can play in the fight against climate change?
I don't know if well, I guess I think poetry can affect change, because I think if it changes an individual, then the individual works for change. So yes. And I also have a point of entry for that, because I've been trying to think a lot. Everyone's like, oh, you know, you have this position, what are you going to do? And I'm thinking, oh, I don't know. I don't know. I'm used to being invisible and no one really paying much mind. But I was thinking, and I'm always thinking of water, right? Because it's the source of so much, you know, destruction and damage and, you know, beauty, but also lots of damage comes with that, right? So I've been thinking about how it would always best be described by the people who were right in the spot, seeing it happen, you know? And so I was thinking of something like working from actual images. I was thinking of something like eco-ekphrastic poems, where people in their communities who are in the park or at the levee or at this favorite tree or just wherever it is, literally using their phones, taking a picture, and then their poem is coming from that. Because you know how it is when you take a picture, right? We've got our paparazzi in the room, okay? You take a picture and it shows what you're pointing at, but it can't contain it all. And who better to tell that story than the one who's witnessing it? I feel like in the South, in Louisiana, and then in New Orleans especially, it seems like there's a lot of people that want to do the talking for us, you know, and I know there's all these people here who can say it much better, and I would like to foster something like that. And so through, like, I guess kind of an ecological lens, but I do think poetry can change that way.
That's awesome. I mean, there's just so much going on, and it can be just so disheartening sometimes. Like, what can we do as poets to try to make, you know, to make affect some sort of change?
I mean, almost just naming it, like seeing it and naming it is part of it, right? Which is hard. I mean, sometimes it's hard to say what has to be said.
To say the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's so many. It feels so overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
You know. But I think if we all do our part, as you said, and we can all bring attention to our corners or our little perspectives, then we can illuminate the entire thing. So wonderful. Okay. All right. Pivoting a little bit. So the other day, I called you up on the phone, and you were hard at work on a festina about Tina Turner.
I was.
So firstly, how did that turn out? And secondly, how often do you typically write in a week? I know you said your poet laureate duties are kind of cut into and everything, but
I was obsessing over the Tina Turner sestina, because those are hard to write, and as you get deep into them, it's just like, ooh, you know, it's like like you're one of those robots that just keeps walking into a brick wall and you can't turn around, you're just walking. It kind of feels like that. So that was getting many, many hours. But usually, and it's because I had a deadline and I was not going to let Kelly down. Like, no way. I was having Tina Turner poems. So that was many, many hours over a period of weeks working on that poem, which probably only got like maybe a B minus of a poem. But, and then, what was the second part of your question?
The second part is, how often do you typically write in a week?
Oh, in my perfect life, I can come to my work every day, pretty much. And I have an office that's all my own, which is great. I mean, I share it with all these animals, but, so I can leave everything spread out that I'm working on, which when I'm working at, it's usually just a pencil, or like a really sharp pencil, and then like a piece of paper that I tear from a legal pad. And I can just kind of work on it like that. And I don't even need hours and hours of time, like just some time. My reality right now is that I finished my Tina Turner poem, and so I'm probably not writing any poems until I get my grades turned in at the end of the semester.
Yes,
so I'm not even trying to think about what I want to do, because it'll make me so sad.
Yes, no, but you know what, we're at the finish line.
Yes,
With
thankfully.
2 more weeks left of this semester. I mean, this week's Thanksgiving, so
Yeah,
the end is in sight.
yeah.
Thank goodness for that. Okay, let me see my next question here. Okay, we started talking a little bit about water and how that's been an influence for you, and I've noticed that throughout your books, it becomes a character in itself. Can you tell us why you're so drawn to water as a poet? And I was going to ask you how you plan to use water in your, but we already talked about that.
Okay.
So maybe just about why you're drawn so much to water.
I mean, I'm a water sign, and so, like in my little Allison brain, I thought, oh, water. There, like it's in my blood, right? But I mean, I guess I grew up on the West Bank, which is I know where you came from to get over here, and in the 70s, it would flood all of the time, and it was just terrifying to me because everything would be fine, and then water's coming in the house, or he would walk home from work with his wallet and his watch in a garbage bag, holding it over his head, and like I'm sure he was fine. Like if I was walking in waist high water, I would probably be laughing. I wouldn't be thinking I was going to die. But when I was a kid watching him, I thought he was in this grave danger, so I was always kind of afraid of him. And then one time I had asthma as a child, and it would get really bad really quickly, and it happened once in a flood. And the police they came and got me like in a boat and floated me out to a street where they could then get me to a hospital. And I just remember being in that boat, and you know how when something's serious with a kid, everyone's like, it's okay, you're gonna be okay, and the kid's like, yeah, right, my arm is chopped off or something. And so it was that vibe, like the adults were scared, and I could tell that. And I was just in that water, like it was like a cradle kind of. So I don't know, those are things going through my mind. I looked up that poem because I knew I was going to read it.
Oh,
Is that
Yes,
what
please,
we're
yes.
doing? And, here's the funny thing. I told you I love people that write down their page numbers. And it looks like I didn't do that.
Is it the
It's in water lines, and I think it's got it's near this pink mark. Yeah.
I thought it was gonna be the Pisces poem.
So, and the title of this poem, I love to use quote unquote low subjects in my poem, like quotes from Twitter or whatever it's called now. And so the title of this poem is a fortune that I got in a fortune cookie. The fortune cookie said, "You will soon be crossing the great waters," which of course means that you'll soon be dying. I just heard crossing the great waters, and that's what I named this poem. I've seen debris, water closing over streets, floating balls of ants, manhole covers that levitate and leak fish, and yet a flood was something I looked forward to. Fondue dinner at dusk, saints I could believe in, keeping watch from hurricane candles while we slept. Half of the year, beginning June 1st, we prepped for the big one. Photo albums on a top shelf, the pantry stocked with canned stew. Card games for those days of water lapping past the threshold, soaked up by walls that darkened like a granite slab in rain. Water always wins. I'm nearly dead of hurricanes. I have traveled by pirogue the grid of city streets erased by flood, not as the crow flies, but as a snake might ribbon through sludge in a ditch. Pulled to the hospital, asthmatic, barely breathing, my mother banging a paddle on the glass door clamped shut, the doctors banging back. I fought off sleep when what I wanted was to float away, buoyed in a roux of mud, the canal's backwash, swamp broth from which birds somehow emerge immaculate.
Thank you. There's so much I love about that.
Thank you.
Water on the wind, the roux of mud really just evokes that. So
Thank you.
I love reading that. Okay, so we talked a little bit about your family, and I feel like your family members are always coming up here. Your mother, your father, your uncles are always making an appearance, right? So I wanted to ask you, do you find it challenging to write honestly about familial figures? How do you know what should be shared with the world, and alternatively, what should be held back and protected from?
That is a very good question, and it's something I really wrestled with in my most recent book. A lot of the stuff with my uncles and stuff like that, like it's kind of like not a mockery, but like a gentle mockery. The way they mock me, I kind of mock them in poems. Mock sounds cruel. Rib, something like that, yeah. So I feel fine with that because they'll kind of recognize the stories, and you know how it is in families, like they all remember kind of the same story but are one-upping each other as they are recounting their exact version or something like that. So I think that's fine in poems. I think it's, for me, I wouldn't feel right being mean in a poem or cruel in a poem, but I'm okay telling the truth in a poem. And those are the questions I really struggled with Our Lady of Bewilderment. In this book, I talk about my mother's suicide attempt, which was something that was a shock. I mean, how could it not be right? And that stuff that I was dealing with, like really in the weeds with that. And so there's a lot of poems I wrote that are not in the book. But the ones that I wrote about it in the book, I agonized over, and I thought, I'm telling the truth, and I'm not being mean. I mean, this is the truth. And was I angry? Yes. Was it traumatic? Yes. Does that person seem not familiar to me? Yes. And so I was okay putting it in the book. I don't enjoy it. It was not a fun journey, but I mean, the poems tell the truth, so.
And that should kind of be our hallmark as poets, right?
Yeah.
Telling the truth. And what that means and what comes with that can be so bittersweet and
yeah. And like I feel like in my books, up until this one, Our Lady of Bewilderment, I was always kind of, I don't want to say hiding behind, like, I just wasn't myself so much front and center in the book as I was in Our Lady of Bewilderment. So in general, for me, that was very difficult because I'm always kind of a little behind the scenes, I guess. So it was wild.
It allowed you kind of to present a more vulnerable side or self.
And you know, I'm so glad you asked me about those early books that I read when I was first a poet, because I mentioned Cheryl St. Germain's book, Making Bread at Midnight, and in that book she talks about her brother's addiction to heroin. I mean, in up close and really intimate and sometimes ugly terms. But she's telling the truth too in that book. So now you're making me see that connection to something that I touched on in that book. Our Lady, yeah.
It's so true. I was with Jericho Brown last week, and he was saying something how even if when you're young and you read a poem, it might not be for you in that moment, but it might be for another moment that you might have in the future. Right?
Definitely.
And so I've been thinking about that. And I'm like, oh, right. Just because I read something right now it doesn't need to immediately resonate with me, but it may be something that I'm gonna need in the future.
Yeah, and you're kind of building that index too,
Yes.
where you can go back and find it
Yes.
in the moment that you need it. Yeah.
That just like, I was like, oh wow. I mean, you think it's so intuitive, right? When someone says it, you're like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So you were saying with your Tina Turner poem, you're like, I would give it like a B minus,
Yeah,
right? So my question for you is, how do you know when a poem you've written is good? And how do you know when a poem is finished? Because sometimes I'm going back to the poem and I'm like, is it done?
So that's, how do I know when a poem is good? When I feel like a poem is really good, like I'll be going, I got you, I got you now. And it just makes me smile, like it's something I've been chasing and I caught it. And I feel that way a lot. I mean, I can write down a lot of notes, but until I get that first notion of what it's going to sound like, when I get that right and I know I've got my end, that makes me do the same thing. Finished, if I can feel like I can do a mic drop at the end, like literal, I like that feeling. I will say an ending is an easy time or place to kind of mess up a poem for me.
Yes.
Anyway.
Me too.
And what was the rest of that?
The rest of it was just how you know when the poem is finished. Or when to stop revising it.
Oh, so I had a friend who was a painter, and I learned an answer to that question from watching him work. And he would do these paintings, and they were just like all the stuff going on. And he would always reach a point where he was like decorating the rims of the painting, just going in and putting stuff and making squiggles. And then he would be like, wait a minute, I'm not painting, I'm decorating. And then he knew that was when it was time to step away from the canvas because it was finished. So in a poem, if I'm fooling with it too much, like I'm maybe making it sound too poetic and it's like, it's a little too much, you know. And for me as a writer, it's easy to sometimes be seduced by all these things that you put down that seem so trippy. But then in reality, I'm like, okay, you know, this has got to go.
Let's shut the door.
Yeah, like thankfully I didn't show this to anybody when I thought it was so brilliant because it's like a D.
Yeah.
It's a D minus.
You know, but I think we need that. We need that access sometimes just
Yeah.
to like, just do it.
And it's funny, I mean, I like to laugh at how bad stuff is when it starts. It's just funny because eventually you'll finish it and it'll be so much better. But it's just funny to see, like, or in my brain, it's just like so one-dimensional sometimes and just being like, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, why are you even a poet? This is so ridiculous. But then I can kind of find my way out of it. I try not to work with something if I'm disgusted with it.
Oh, that feeling. It's like,
Yeah.
how do you get rid of that? It's just, you just put the poem away.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh.
Yeah. So now the Tina says, Tina, you can't stop and start a Tina. Like you got to finish it. So I was pushing on it, and that's probably why I lost some threads maybe in it. You know.
It's hard because you want to like maintain that rhythm and that cadence of it, you know. And if you step away, you can't really get back into that. It's hard to.
I read it to my husband before the poetry reading, and he was like, "Are you gonna read the whole thing?" And I was like, "Just say what you mean." And he was not wrong. I mean, what he was saying is that it was just I had too much. Like I was saying things twice. And so I was like, okay, emergency edit. So I was reading from the poem where I had scratched all this stuff out. Anyway, so it was funny.
Wow, I love that. And I think it's so important to have people who are not. Is your husband a writer? Is he a poet?
No, he's a musician. And I only read to him, like, I'm not asking him for notes on a poem. Like, it'll be like, it's finished. You like it, right? You know,
right.
He's a musician, so he used to write songs, and that's a lot different.
Wow, I love that. Have you ever dabbled in writing songs? I'm always interested in that, and as a poet, but I'm afraid.
Well, I mean, I've had people use my poems as songs, And I'm fine with that. I mean, I use sometimes repeating forms like the villanelle or the terzanelle, or you were talking about Jericho Brown who did the duplex. I wrote a Tina Turner duplex too. And those types of repetitions lend themselves, I think, to music. So, yeah, I'm fine with it. I mean, I personally don't sing, but yeah.
Awesome. Well, that's a perfect segue into my next question.
Okay.
So your work employs a variety of different poetic forms, as you were saying. So sonnets, villanelles, all of these things are so wonderful. How do you know which poetic form to choose from when you're wanting to begin a new poem? And what form would you say that you're most drawn to?
Okay, so the first answer is, how do I know which form is the right form? And really, I don't. Like, I have a hunch, and I kind of go in that direction. Villanelles are weird. I feel like I write a lot of those, but sometimes I'll be going and I kind of keep coming back, and I'm like, wait a minute, this is a refrain. And then I can maybe see clearly how to do it. So the form helps me sometimes if I have something I want to build and I don't, I'll say, oh, I've got these Legos and I can make this, okay? So the form can help with that. I mean, the best villanelle writer, in my opinion, is another Louisiana poet named Julie Kane. Like,
yes.
She is the best. So it's something in the blood around here, I guess, people writing villanelles. The form that I'm most drawn to, lately I've been playing with sonnets a lot, and not a traditional sonnet. I'm not so interested in that. I'm interested in how far you can kind of push a sonnet and have it still be a sonnet. I don't know if it was last year or the year before, Diane Seuss's book, Frank Sonnets. She does all sorts of things with the sonnet, and she's really connected to her kind of Midwestern landscape and lifestyle in beautiful ways, and so that was an influence. Terrence Hayes, I don't know if he has the whole book of sonnets, like Sonnets for My Past and Future American Assassin. Yeah. But also in his poems, he would have poems sometimes that were just one sentence, and so I liked playing with that, like how long can I just sustain this utterance? And for me, I feel like the sonnet works really well for that, so that's been fun. And then there's another poet I love named Barbara Hamby, who wrote these, what she calls lingo sonnets, and they're kind of double abecedarian sonnets. They're 13 lines long, and so there's, like, if I'm starting with the letter A, the line will start with the letter A, and then end with the letter B. And then the next line starts with C, ends with D, and on and on and on. And she works her way through the whole alphabet doing that. And those are really weird, because you're not using, meter and things, you're using syntax and weird words and vocabulary, and how do I make this all go together? So I think the sonnets are fun to play with, and they're fun. They're like pocket poems, right? Like, I can print it around and can kind of carry it around with me and fool with it and think about it. So I like playing with those.
Would you be opposed to reading your lingo sonnet, the Pelegrin in her Poetic?
Oh yeah. Okay.
I think it's extraordinary. So I would love to hear you read that.
So I'm making a reference to the did I take your book? I took your copy of the book and it's marked. Okay. I was referring to the state seal, which has the pelican tearing at its breast, which I love because it's just so dramatic. So here's my lingo sonnet. The Pelegrin in her piety. Medieval pelican with a trio in the nest, you tear your breast open on Louisiana's flag, but your blood milk piety is muted to a single drop. Queen of bestiaries and stained glass, lone feathered martyr spraying gore. By name alone, we could be twins. We share the deepest urge, motherhood's ogre love, a blur that comforts and devours, where shiv wounds, pinches, and nips are stifled by sheer will. In my hand, the axe yields to a child's voice, quieting in my skull the flies that buzz. Alpha angel with a sword of fire, that's me the instant any cherub cries. And you, pelican, of shorebirds the wolf, You crash dive to feed, elbow wings akimbo, throating so many fish you can't lift off. Greed is one defense, but famine empties even the glutton's mouth. Impossible horror crowds the world, and I fight fist and fang, and my mojo kills. Even you, my doves, I could kiss you to death, squeeze you, kill, kill, kill. Which is terrible to put in a poem.
I love the ending. I love it. I was like, yes. When I read that, maybe I'm just a weirdo. But I love that poem so
thank you.
much. It really just.
I like that one too, and no one ever talks about that one, so thank you.
Of course, I was like, I have to get this one today. Like, it's on my list.
Thank you.
Thank you for reading that.
You're welcome.
It's really an extraordinary piece. So, talking about maybe some new work, are you working on any new projects right now that we should be looking out for?
Finish your question, I'm sorry.
Oh, good. Well, that's the first part of the question.
So to answer the first part of your question, no. I was writing poems, and I have some poems that I've written, but they are not in any shape, form, or project. And I'm looking forward to actually not having a project for a while. Just because I always feel, I was telling this to Brad, I feel like I'm always rushing to a book, and I don't know why, so I'm going to not rush. I'm just going to take a long time.
Yeah, you deserve it. Just like, let it be.
So, but actually, that's a lie. Because I just remembered, I haven't worked on my work for so long. I just remembered, I kind of am working on a project. And that's called Multitudes, like from Whitman, right? I am large and contain multitudes. And it, I was talking earlier about carrying little pieces of poetry with you everywhere, like that's my brain, and so I try to work some of that stuff into all of the poems, and not just poetry, but like stuff I've read on Twitter or whatever it is. Like for example, a Proud Boy. Do you all know? Have you heard of that? Like there's the Proud Boys there's those Proud Boys that stormed the Capitol. But it's also the name for a horse, a gelding horse that he's been cut, he's lost his little package, but he's still cocky. And so they call that a Proud Boy, which I think is hilarious. So that's a little something I put into a poem. It's called Our Lady of the Proud Boys. But anyway. It's a sonnet too. It's a curtal sonnet, so it's like a short sonnet, which was hard because you have weird rhymes that you're working with. So anyway, I guess I am sort of working on a project.
I love this project already. I'm obsessed. Okay, this is amazing. So what would be the best way for our audience to keep up with the work that you're doing as a poet laureate right now, and how can we keep in your zone?
I had to laugh when you were reading my bio, and you said the words that I wrote, which are, for updates about what Alison Pelegrin's doing, go to her website. And there's no updates. I've been really overwhelmed lately. So you should technically go to my website. Okay. But it is also true that as I have events lined up, people often tag me in the publicity, and I'll kind of do it on Instagram as well. But I'm just not the best at that. So I will try to get my website updated.
Yeah, we just want to support you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so which poets are you currently reading right now? Any recommendations for our audience?
Well, so we were just talking about sonnets, right? I'm teaching a class on the evolution of form in the spring, and I'm tasked with trying to figure out which books I can order and how many I can order. And so obviously the book that's not moving from the list is Olio by Tim Bajas, which is like, I just don't feel like I'm exaggerating when I say I think that is the most brilliant book of poetry that maybe I've ever read in my life. It is unbelievable. You can read the poems up, down, sideways, crossways, 3 different ways inside of each sonnet. I don't understand how a human brain did that. I've taught the book before, and I just basically put it on the thing and we just bow down to it.
That was on trying.
Yeah. So I've been looking at that, and I've been, Patricia Smith's book, Incendiary Art, is something that I really love. She works with that form, the golden shovel, and I don't know if people know what that is. It's a poem where the last word of every line in the poem comes from a poem. That makes no sense. So this was Terrence Hayes who invented this, and he used Gwendolyn Brooks' poem, We Real Cool, the 7 at the golden shovel. We real cool, we left school, we lurk late, we strike straight, we sing sin, we thin gin, we jazz June, we die soon. So it's this terrible elegy and all these things. So if you're really doing it right, you're using a Gwendolyn Brooks poem. And in that book, Patricia Smith has a poem that's called Black Poured Directly into the Wound. And it's a double golden shovel, and the poem she uses for that is the last quatrain of the Ballad of Emmett Till, which is also by Gwendolyn Brooks, and it's about Emmett's mother, Mimi, kissing her killed boy, and she's sorry. And then Brooks looks away, or she takes us out of that scene and talks about the chaos and the red fields. You know, it's really powerful. So I'm fascinated by what Smith does in that poem, and I don't see how I can not also put that book on the syllabus. So that's something I've been reading. I've been reading Mary Ruefle's new book, which is, it's prose, but I think it's poems. I don't really know what it is. It's called The Book. So I've been reading that, and I have The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride. I love to read novels, like when I'm, like I try to read a little bit every day. And what else am I reading? Oh, there's a new translation of the Iliad by Emily Wilson. It's called The Iliad. And so I've been making my way through that. I also have it on audio, so I can listen to it in my car. And it's she really uses iambic pentameter throughout, and it's wonderful. And it's all blood and gore, which I like, not for the blood and gore per se, but you're hearing the story of people who are pushed to their absolute limit. And anyway, I think it's a brilliant poem. So those are a few things I'm reading right now.
Thank you for those recommendations.
You're welcome.
They're stellar. Okay, my last question for you, and then we'll open it up to a Q&A if anyone wants to ask Alison any questions. What advice do you have for young poets? What do you think that they need to know, and how should they keep themselves inspired in such a fraught world?
I guess it's bad to tell young poets to go on Instagram. I mean, I guess, like, if they're 13 or so, they're probably on there already. And that's, everyone, like, poo-poos on, you know, Instagram poetry, but I find great poems on Instagram all the time, and they're easy to save. Like, you can literally have an anthology of poems on your phone. You just save it. So that's the first thing I would say, is build a collection of poems. And it's so easy to do now, for free with the internet. I mean, if you don't have Instagram, you can go to the Poetry Foundation, and they've done so much stuff there. They publish this amazing work, and they have people talking about it and reading it so you can hear it and see it. So that's kind of the cliche advice of read, but that is what I'm saying. And the other thing I would say is just don't worry so much about, I mean, don't grade yourself. Don't say, oh, this is dumb, oh, this is stupid, oh, this is this. Don't do that. Just put it in your notebook. I mean, it's not getting broadcast on Times Square, right? It's just, you're just putting it down, and I think that in itself has value. So I would never give up, and I would never let anybody discourage me. I would never let a teacher discourage me. I hear stories from my students about having these teachers, and I don't know why they're teachers sometimes. But
It's so strange. Like, you wonder how certain people have gotten their jobs.
yeah, if you hate children, why are you teaching? Like, it's just, and all you can do is say mean things to people that want to be poets. Like, what is wrong
Just
with
go
you?
home.
Send it to me. And I think it's also important to find a community of support. I've loved seeing that this weekend. There's so many people supporting each other, and I think that's great. And you can find that in your dorm, in the lobby, at your group, at your lunch group, whatever. I think there's a lot of different ways to find that. So
Thank you so much.
you're welcome, and thank you for those questions. I know you worked your butt off.
Oh, I
doing
love it.
those.
I love this work. It keeps me alive. Thank you for answering these questions.
Thank you so much,
I
Skye.
appreciate you so much. This is a gift that you're giving all of us being here. just want to turn it over to you guys to see if you have any questions that you'd like to ask Allison. Or just
You mentioned a book of poetry, the first book, and I didn't understand.
Oh, so the first book of poetry that I mentioned was Olio, O-L-I-O, and it's by Tahimba Jess, and I'm bad at spelling out loud. It's T-Y-E-H-I-M-B-A, Jess is the last name, J-E-S-S. And you can't miss it. It's a huge book, and it's got this white cover, and it's about this thick.
And one more.
Yeah.
The poet from Louisiana, the gentleman, it sounded like a gentleman from Lafourche Parish or something. That your teacher referred you to?
Oh, Yusef Kumunyaka.
Yusef Komanyaka, K-O-M-U-N-Y-A-K-A-A. And he's widely on the internet. Like, I mean, his books are everywhere, but he's also widely on the internet. And my favorite poem of his is maybe Thanks.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Of course, thank you for that question. Brad, did you want to ask a question?
And this is maybe like a follow-up to all the conversation, but what keeps you going?
As a poet,
Because it's, you know, it's hard work to get some love for it.
a little love just gets parceled out, right? What keeps me going as a poet? I love having the time and luxury to say exactly what I mean. I'm not good off the cuff, you know, but if I lock myself in that room with my pencil and a million books and time, I can really say exactly what I mean. And it feels like a superpower. Like, I feel like poets have a superpower that's underappreciated. But I love that. And I also love, I mean, we were kind of laughing about like our little recognition and our little checks for poems that go in magazines or whatever. But it's also very freeing because no one is waiting on me to write a book. Like, I have no deadline. No one's saying, you know, where are those poems? Where are they? No one ever says that to me. Okay. And so I feel like I can do whatever I want. I'm doing what I feel like.
Yes.
Which I love. So I don't know if that's really an answer.
Thank you for that question.
Thank you, Brad.
Would anyone else like to answer the question? Sure.
So, you know, you're the Louisiana Poet Laureate for 2 years. What does one do as Poet Laureate? Like, what's the day in the life? What are your duties? What do you have to do?
I mean, honestly, I'm answering a lot of emails. And the way they put it in the description is like they tour the state and raise the profile of poetry, which I think is very vague, and you can't be vague around a poet, right? Because then I'm going to make it my own thing. So I am trying to do a few things. I'm trying to get into all quadrants of the state and not just be like in the places that want me. So like you have to kind of force yourself on places, and luckily there's people at the LEH who can help with that. And we had to talk about the kind of stuff I liked and that I was interested in doing, and they're kind of trying to put me in situations like that. I was sort of talking about the eco-ekphrastic poetry, and once the semester's gone and I can, like, my brain belongs to me again, I want to start writing out different prompts and situations that I might do with that and kind of test that out until I get it really good. Because ultimately I want to be able to record like maybe a seasonal lesson. I don't really like that word, but that people could use in a classroom if I couldn't get there or whatever. So.
It might be kind of cool to work with someone who's photographing like, you know, the natural
Yeah,
world.
and I was thinking, like, wouldn't it be cool to have a naturalist? You could do it with a naturalist or whatever, yeah. And luckily at Southeastern, the communication department will film videos and everything, and it's not like filmed on your phone, like it's real, you know. So that'll be a resource I hope to take advantage of.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. I'm so excited about this project.
Thank you.
I think it's such a great idea.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Megan.
I'll read this, which is part of the project. I lied. I said I wasn't working on it. So this is a poem that pulls from the haiku poet Isa, and then also Philip Larkin, like the curmudgeonly British librarian poet, Philip Larkin. It's called Day Drinking at the End of Days. Everything is on fire, but I feel about average thanks to the Larkin plan, which is to work all day and get half drunk at night. This is how I wrote my books and raised my kids and rebuilt after Katrina, the first hurricane to leave a permanent mark. A part of me will always be exiled in a hotel room, wanting to stab in the eye anyone who says, I wonder if they should rebuild. But there is a case to be made. Why rinse cans for recycling that winds up at the dump? Not to mention the kids I birthed into this hot mess of a red state. No amount of green or bayou fog can ever make up for it. There are literal pilots dive bombing pesticides, not to mention the open secret malicious stonemason who made a house call to say he has our back. This was pre-insurrection, so I thought he was being friendly despite the moat of mean dogs patrolling his compound. But now I wonder if it was a sign, as when a cardinal slammed into my car, his soul released in an upward blast, a feather bomb. Is the crimson bird prophetic? A heart beating outside of my body? Is it time to tie off loose ends, to enter deeper into, or to wake from my rot gut buzz, so that I might sing as I walk into the fire?
Thank you.